Livy. End of Book 1, Rape of Lucretia. The Rutulians, who were at the time in possession of Ardea, were, considering the nature of their country and the age in which they lived, exceptionally wealthy. This circumstance really originated the war, for the Roman king was anxious to repair his own fortune, which has been exhausted by the magnificent scale of his public works, and also to conciliate his subjects by a distribution of the spoils of war. His tyranny had already produced disaffection, but what moved their special resentment was the way they had been so long kept by the king at manual and even servile labor. An attempt was made to take Ardea by assault. When that failed, recourse was had to a regular investment to starve the enemy out. When troops are stationary, as is the case in a protracted more than in an active campaign, furloughs are easily granted, more so to the men of rank, however, than to the common soldiers. The royal princes sometimes spent their leisure hours in feasting and entertainments, and at a wine party given by Sextus Tarquinius, at which Collatinus, the son of Agrius, was present, the conversation happened to turn upon their wives, and each began to speak of his own in terms of extraordinary high praise. As the dispute became warm, Collatinus said that there was no need of words. It could, in a few hours, be ascertained how far his Lucretia was superior to all the rest. "Why do we not," he exclaimed, "if we have any youthful vigor about us, mount our horses and pay our wives a visit, and find out their characteristics on the spot? What we see of the behavior of each on the unexpected arrival of her husband, let that be the surest test." They were heated with wine, and all shouted, "Good, come on!" Setting spur to their horses, they galloped off to Rome, where they arrived as darkness was beginning to close in. Thence they proceeded to Galatia, where they found Lucretia very differently employed from the king's daughter-in-law, whom they had seen passing their time in feasting and luxury with their acquaintances. She was seen sitting at her wool work in the hall, late at night, with her maids busy around her. The palm in this completion of wifely virtue was awarded to Lucretia. She welcomed the arrival of her husband and the Tarquinians, whilst her victorious spouse courteously invited the royal princes to remain as his guests. Sextus Tarquinian, inflamed by the beauty and exemplary purity of Lucretia, formed the vile project of effecting her dishonor. After their youthful frolic, they returned for the time to camp. A few days afterwards, Sextus Tarquinian went, unknown to Collatinus, with one companion to Galatia. He was hospitably received by the household, who suspected nothing, and after supper was conducted to the bedrooms set apart for guests. When all around seemed safe and everybody fast asleep, he went in the frenzy of his passion with a naked sword to the sleeping Lucretia, and placing his left hand on her breast, said, "Silence, Lucretia, I am Sextus Tarquinian, and I have a sword in my hand. If you utter a word, you shall die." When the woman, terrified out of her sleep, saw that no help was near, and instant death threatening her, Tarquinian began to confess his passion, pleaded, used threats as well as entreaties, and employed every argument likely to influence a female heart. When he saw that she was inflexible, and not moved even by the fear of death, he threatened to disgrace her, declaring that he would lay the naked corpse of the slave by her near-dead body, so that it might be said that she had been slain in foul adultery. By this awful threat, her lust triumphed over her inflexible chastity, and Tarquinian went off exulting in having successfully attacking her honor. Lucretia, overwhelmed with grief at such a frightful outrage, sent a messenger to her father at Rome and to her husband at Ardea, asking them to come to her, each accompanied by one faithful friend. It was necessary to act, and to act promptly. A horrible thing has happened. Spurius Lucretius came with Publius Valerius, the son of Valusus, Collatinus with Lucius Junius Brutus, with whom he happened to be returning to Rome, when he was met by his wife's messenger. They found Lucretia sitting in her room, prostrate with grief. As they entered, she burst into tears, and to her husband's inquiry whether all was well, replied, "No, what can be well with a woman when her honor is lost? The mark of a stranger, gladness, are in your bed. But it is only the body that can be violated. The soul is pure. Death shall bear witness to that. But pledge me your solemn word that the adulterer shall not go unpunished. It is Sextus Tarquin who, coming as an enemy instead of a guest, forced from me last night by brutal violence a pleasure fatal for me, and if you are men, fatal to him." They all successfully pledged their word, and tried to console the distracted woman by turning the guilt from the victim of the outrage to the predator, and urging that it is the mind that sins, not the body, and where there have been no consent, there is no guilt. "It is for you," she said, "to see that he gets his deserts. Although I acquit myself of the sins, I do not free myself from the penalty. No unchaste woman shall henceforth live and plead Lucretia's example." She had a knife concealed in her dress, which she plunged into her heart, and fell dying on the floor. Her father and husband raised the death cry. Whilst they were absorbed in grief, Brutus drew the knife from Lucretia's wound, and holding it, dripping with blood, in front of him, said, "By this blood, most pure before the outrage, wrought by the king's son, I swear, and you, O gods, I call to witness that I will drive hence Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, together with his cursed wife and his whole blood, with fire and sword, and every means in my power, and I will not suffer them or anyone else to reign in Rome." Then he handed the knife to Calanus, and then to Lucretius and Valerius, who were all astounded at the marvel of one thing, wondering whence Brutus had acquired this new character. They swore as they were directed. All their grief changed to wrath, and they followed the lead of Brutus, who summoned them to abolish the monarchy forthwith. They carried the body of Lucretia from her home down to the Forum, where, owing to the unheard of atrocity of the crime, they at once collected a crowd. Each had his own complaint to make of the weakness and violence of the royal house. Whilst all were moved by the father's deep distress, Brutus bade them stop their tears and idle laments, and urged them to act as men and Romans and take up arms against their insolent foes. All the high-spirited amongst the younger men came forward as armed volunteers. The rest followed their example. A portion of this body was left to hold Galatia, and guards were stationed at the gates to prevent any news of the movement from reaching the king. The rest marched in arms to Rome with Brutus in command. On their arrival, the sight of so many men in arms spread panic and confusion wherever they marched, but when again the people saw the foremost men of the state were leading the way, they realized that whatever the movement was, it was a serious one. The terrible occurrence created no less excitement in Rome than it had done in Galatia. There was a rush from all quarters of the city to the Forum. When they gathered there, the herald summoned them to attend the tribune of the Celeres. This was the office which Brutus happened at the time to be holding. He made a speech quite out of keeping with the character and temper he had up to that day assumed. He dwelt upon the brutality and licentiousness of Sextus Tarquin, the infamous outrage on Lucretia and her pitiful death, the bereavement sustained by her father, Triseptinus, to whom the cause of his death's daughter was more shameful and distressing than the actual death itself. Then he dwelt on the tyranny of the king, the toils and suffering of the plebeians kept underground, clearing out ditches and sewers. Roman men, conquerors of all the surrounding nations, turned from warriors into artisans and stonemasons. He reminded them of the shameful murder of Servius Tullius and his daughter driving in her accursed chariot over her father's body, and solemnly invoked the gods as the avengers of murdered parents. By enumerating these, and I believe other still more atrocious incidents which his keen sense of the present injustice suggested, but which is not easy to give in detail, he goaded on the incensed multitude to strip the king of his sovereignty, and pronounce a sentence of banishment against Tarquin with his wife and children. With a picked body of the juniors who volunteered to follow him, he went off to the camp at Ardea to incite the army against the king, leaving the command in the city of Lucretius, who had previously been made prefect of the city by the king. During the commotion, Tullia fled to the palace amidst the execrations of all she met, men and women alike invoking against her father's avenging spirit. When the news of these proceedings reached the camp, the king, alarmed at the turn affairs were taking, hurried to Rome to quell the outbreak. Brutus, who was on the same road, had become aware of his approach, and to avoid meeting him took another route, so that he reached Ardea and Tarquian, Rome, almost at the same time, though by different ways. Tarquin found the gates shut, and a decree of banishment passed against him. The liberator of the city received a joyous welcome in the camp, and the king's sons were expelled from it. Two of them followed their father into exile amongst the Etruscans in Caire. Sextus Tarquin proceeded to Gabii, which he looked upon as his kingdom, but was killed in revenge for the old feuds he had kindled by his rapine and murders. Lucius Tarquinius Superbus reigned 25 years. The whole duration of the regal government, from the foundation of the city to its liberation, was 240 years. Two consuls were then elected in the assembly of the century by the prefect of the city, in accordance with the regulations of Servius Tullius. They were Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucius Tarquinius Collanus. The end.